Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Good afternoon. This is the community meeting for the Bay Area on police-free schools. My name is Tamara, she, they. Go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Name, pronouns. You can say where you're coming from. I'm in downtown San Jose. And any organizations that you may be affiliated with. And we'll get started in just a couple minutes.
Should we be sharing for everyone? Because it looks like the chat might be host only.
Oh, yeah, sorry. There you go. Now it can go to everybody. So our organizations here today, Black Organizing Project from Oakland. So those of you who are joining, this is the Bay Area community meeting on police-free schools. My name is Tamara. I'm part of San Jose Unified Equity Coalition, and I will be the MC for this afternoon. Please put your name, pronouns, and affiliated organization in the chat. I'm also a founder of an organization called TEA, Teachers Empowering Youth Activists, represented here by my fellow comrade, Stormy. And we also have translation services in Spanish. So
Hola,
by Janelli. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hola, mi nombre es Yaneli. Si necesitan introducción en español, yo estaré aquí. Va a haber un tiempo donde nos moveremos a otros cuartos. Por favor, en el chat que está a su derecha, si necesita traducción, ponga su nombre y ponga español para saber dónde los tenemos que colocar. También abajo de su pantalla va a haber dos globitos. Uno dice inglés y otro dice español. Por favor, escoja el que dice español. Gracias.
Okay, I see we have a few more people joining. So thank you. Yeah, we're going to get started now. Thank you all for joining and making the time to be here. So we've got quite the lineup, and from Black Organizing Project, we've got Jessica Black and Desiree McSwin. Hopefully I said that right, I'm sorry. And they will be presenting to us on the ways and strategies and efforts that they put in place to seek police-free schools in Oakland School District. So we'll be learning from them, and then we will be having a question and answer session, as well as getting into breakout rooms.
Hola, vamos a empezar con la organización que se llama Black Organizing Project. Es una organización que trabaja para eliminar la policía de las escuelas. Han sido exitosos en hacerlo en el distrito escolar de Oakland. Ahora están tratando de hacerlo en otros lugares, incluyendo en San Jose.
Alrighty. We've also got quite a few other organization leaders here, and Angelina Rodriguez, who is a lead organizer for the Young Women's Freedom Center here in Santa Clara County.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I also wanted to bring attention that we do have two young organizers here, Jocelyn Aguilar and Ana Bessie Fuentes, also organizing with Young Women's Freedom Center. Thank you for your thank you for making time out of your busy Zoom schedules to come and meet with us. The other organizations who are present are, of course, Black Organization Project and Young Women's Freedom Center and San Jose Unified Equity Coalition. But we also have Silicon Valley Democratic Socialists of America, Grassroots Law Project, FLY, or Fresh Lifelines for Youth. We have Surge, Standing Up for Racial Justice. We have the Coalition for Racial Justice in Fremont Unified High School District, Black Lives Matter, Ventura County. Stories for Solidarity. We have the Derek Sanderlin Resolution, Rice Center, sorry. We have PACT, which is People Acting in Community Together. We have CAIR, San Francisco Bay Area, MAIS San Jose, Santa Clara County Public Defender's Office, CU from Boulder, Colorado, Amigos de Guadalupe, Filipino Advocates for Justice, Engage Fremont, Lacey, or Legal Advocates for Children and Youth, San Jose Teachers Association, and GCAP, which is Gilroy Community Action on Policing. And I'll pass it back to Tamara.
So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. You know, these are all organizations that I think we're all trying to work together to make sure that we have police-free schools and more responsive practices and programs, and more money put towards those programs, right? Alrighty, so it's there in Oakland Unified School District and East Side Union School District, as well as Alum Rock. There have been successful efforts to remove police from schools. And we're gonna learn today from Des Mims, who is a mother, community activist, member, and communications coordinator of Black Organizing Project, who has dedicated herself to the work of abolishing school police to disrupt the school to prison pipeline and provide students and community with transformative justice. We are also gonna be learning from Jessica Black, and she is a Minnesota native with passion for social justice and cultural interpretation, a mother of two. And Jessica came to California in 2013 in order to reconnect with her family. And for the last 10 years, she's worked to further enhance her skills in strategic planning, as well as making sure that our education and criminal justice system is reformed. So thank you both, Des and Jessica, for being here. And I'm gonna hand it off to you to go ahead and tell the people how we can further implement a police-free world and police-free schools and support our students. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for having us. I know a lot of us have been in rooms and worked with each other already, and we're all obviously fighting against the same beast that is policing in schools. So I'm excited to be here. And then I'll just pass it to Jessica really quickly before I get into our presentation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for having us here. Looking forward to the conversation and really sharing with you all some of the lessons learned and the organizing practices, some strategies and tactics that we used along the way to remove the police from schools. So excited to be here, so excited to share, and also excited to hear from you all.
All righty. You know, we're all still navigating this Zoom world and things seem new when you're presenting. But yeah, you know, talking about police-free schools and really how we made this a reality and not a dream in Oakland. You know, some things were unique to Oakland, but obviously other things are going to be applied and can be applied elsewhere, including San Jose and other cities. And so excited to give you guys some of these nuggets that we learned and, you know, all of that. But to start, Black Organizing Project, I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with us, but we are a member-led community organization. We highlight, uplift always the voices and experiences of those most impacted by these systems, because we do believe that we are the ones that are best equipped to lead this fight. We're also multi-generational, meaning students, parents, families, aunties, uncles, everybody organizes side by side in our spaces. And that's important to us because systems like the public education system, like the criminal justice system, impact whole families, entire communities. So it's important for those impacted and harmed by the systems to be the ones at the table, to be the ones driving the work, to be the ones making the decisions. And in a larger context, we work for racial, social, and economic justice for and with Oakland and the Bay Area's Black community, and then the broader community. And so we just wanted to start by giving a little brief kind of snapshot of some of the phases that we broke this work down into. And, this has been 10 years, so it's a decade-long fight that we've been in, engaging against eliminating police in schools. But breaking it down into 5 phases, retroactively, we look back now and we can see, there was phase 1, which was really heavily research and base building. Phase 2, which was restrictions, or, mostly known as reforms, oversight, also. Sorry, I was muted. Getting data out to the community. Phase 3, reduction, and how we kind of reduced some of the harm through some of the policies that we got passed in phase 2. Phase 4 was really focusing on eliminating school police. And, in Oakland, we had 3 levels of policing. So we had the, school resource officers, we had Oakland Police Department, the city police, but they also had their own internal police department. And that's kind of really what we honed in on too. So eliminating that entire school police department was the focus of phase 4. And then, looking now into phase 5, where we're moving into implementation and really looking forward to the real transformation of school culture. So phase 1, BOP started in 2009. And at that point, we were what our name says, basically, which is a project. We started out as a project to really emphasize and address the need for organizing in the Black community, but also by the Black community, for the Black community. So that's how Black Organizing Project was started. But then we created our campaign, which is the BOSS campaign, or Bettering Our School Systems campaign. And that was launched in 2011 after the killing of Raheem Brown, who was this young Black man here pictured, who was actually gunned down by school police, Oakland school police, in 2011 in front of Skyline High School, which is a very, affluent high school up in the hills of Oakland. So there's the context of that also, of, the reality of Hills School versus Flatland schools, as we talk about in Oakland a lot, and the disparities that exist within those demographics. But he was killed by school police in 2011. And, that brought the awareness to BOP that school policing was an issue, and it wasn't just an issue, but there was a whole arm of policing that our school district was investing into. And so after that, we really started to engage heavily in the community and really getting the word out, but also getting a feel for the community on what the experiences that are that they're having, the information that they may have about school policing. And so we did listening sessions. We did heavy outreach. I mean, door-to-door outreach, on the corner outreach. We did surveys in the community. And then we overwhelmingly heard from the community that they wanted to address policing as an issue. And at that time, we were also faced with the decision to take on Raheem and his, kind of individualized experience as a fight, and kind of choose to identify him as the issue and get justice for him specifically? Or was this going to be a bigger, larger fight to address the overall, overarching issue of policing in schools? And so that's what we decided to do, was make this a campaign that's really going to target and address policing in schools. obviously to focus on the reinvestment into student supports rather than punitive discipline and surveillance. But from that time that we launched this campaign in 2011, we ultimately always had the goal of abolition. And we wrote on a whiteboard then, and we said it then, that we would eliminate OUSD school police by 2020. And that's what we set out to do. And I'm going to pass over to Jessica now.
All right, thank you, Des. So as Des mentioned, there were some, in this next phase, people were not ready to hear police-free schools. And so again, this was a 10-year fight, and we had to kind of make our way, organize our way to police-free schools. So what we did is we implemented a few things. So in 2012, we passed a complaint policy that that really was designed to capture people's stories if they felt harassed or had been abused by police services. Before we came and passed this policy, there was no legal way for people to actually report if they had experienced harm. So in 2012, we passed the complaint policy. In 2014, we passed a board policy that mirrored, as you'll see in 2015, this MOU that was between OUSD and OPD. And so what they did was really restricted the role of police. Before we stepped in police, there was no defining of their role, right? So we said, okay, at the least we could do is limit harm from the police. So we stepped in and we said, you know, police do not act as the disciplinaries for students or anything like that, that is done by school staff and administrators, that police cannot question young people without exhausting their entire emergency contact list. And other things like students would not be arrested for possessing like small amounts of marijuana, that they would actually be referred to other social services that could support at getting to the root cause. Lastly, in 2015, what we did was really work to eliminate suspensions for willful defiance. So we noticed that a lot of Black students were being suspended at very high disproportionate rates for things that were not violent at all, for things like chewing gum, rolling their eyes, talking back, or if the teacher was just irritated with them, that they were being suspended. And so we fought to get the elimination of willful defiance for K through 12. We also, under there, you'll see, we also fought for funding to go to other programs like Restorative Justice Program and the African American Male Achievement Program. These were all of these were very important because they were a way. Meanwhile, while we were winning these policies, it was our people that was winning these policies. It was our organizing. So we organized and really developed our base of members to really do the research themselves, to really you know, go on school campuses and figure out what is going on with students, to hear all perspectives. And so when we were winning these policies, it was because of the base of people that we had behind us. As Des has said earlier, it was really about making sure that the people who are most impacted were a part of crafting what solutions could look like. And I think that that's important for us to emphasize, is that it is through organizing that we were able to have these incremental wins that led up to this larger win of the removal of police from schools. So in this third phase, we continue to focus on the reduction of harm. We really had to work, and we learned a lot of lessons from passing those policies. Like, some of the lessons that we learned is that we can get a policy passed, but a policy is just a piece of paper if we don't focus heavily on the implementation, right? And so we noticed that as soon as we turned our eyes away from the implementation of the policies, even with the willful defiance policy, they just found other ways to recode and suspend children, right? So we really had to focus on the implementation of these policies. With our complaint policy, we actually had to walk around to each school and make sure that the complaint policy was posted so that people could have access to it. We spent lots of time educating school staff and administrators around the willful defiance policy as well. And so in this phase, we actually spent time focusing on implementation, but always at the core of this is making sure that we are strengthening our base and developing the capacity of our leaders within the context of the organization. We also started to very intentionally build allies locally, because what we also knew is that in order for us to win this, it is going to take all of us to win this. And there was some moments of education, even with our own allies, that had to happen in these times. We had to teach our allies, when we're talking about the removal or the abolition of police, what we actually mean, because a lot of people could not wrap their mind around reimagining what schools could look like without police. So we spent a whole period of education, educating allies, educating people in the community, educating educators. um, we also really took an opportunity to develop and build out our infrastructure and our organization, making sure that we also had like the staff capacity to be able to hold us moving into this next phase 4.
And I would just add to two big things that came up for me in this phase that were really important was also in the process of going school to school and making sure that these things were being implemented. It was also a time to get a lot of intel and information and really kind of like landscape the schools and be, you know, teachers and admin and stuff like that. And even students would tell us things like, you know, we agree with you, it's an issue, but a lot of the teachers are the ones calling the police, or, you know, here's who's doing this and here's who's doing what and why. And similarly with the policies that were passed that we mentioned in the were passed really to get data. So in a lot of those things, I think like the MOU between the Oakland School Police Department and the board, they had to report out twice a year. And so, you know, throughout that data, we got to see a lot of the disproportionate rates just right there in our face. We were able to take that data and disaggregate it and really kind of break down and use those policies against them. But one of the catches to that was that a lot of people are comfortable with reforms. And so even board members and teachers and admin and, you know, school staff who agreed with us to a certain extent, they wanted to stay comfortable in the reform area. So they wanted to just cut, you know, maybe cut a couple police officers down and keep the ones that they thought might be good, or examples like that. And so that became kind of an area to contend with too, is to continue to push people to make sure that they're along with us with the vision of abolition. Although these are wins and they feel good and, you know, they're great, they're just steps to the ultimate goal of abolition.
Yeah, thank you for that, Des. That's great. And also we found too with some of the policies that we got passed, like the MOUs, at times there were people who were using those policies or suggesting to use those policies to actually keep police in schools. So that was also a lesson learned that we had around the MOUs. So moving into phase 4, when meeting the moment. And so in this phase, it was a very interesting phase. We actually had heard from the school board members all the time. They would say things to us like, well, we can't have that discussion about removal of police from schools because what will we have as an alternative? Or how can we actually remove police from schools? And so there's this whole conversation because Oakland Unified School District, because of a budget issue, worked to get rid of police, and they did it illegally. They ran into a labor lawsuit. And so we had to actually do the research around the lawsuit. We had to figure out what they did wrong, and we had to you know, create a plan and how to actually eliminate police from schools. And we did that by producing the People's Plan for Police-Free Schools in this time. So we produced the People's Plan for Police-Free Schools. And even when we produced the People's Plan for Police-Free Schools, it still was not, like, they still weren't accepting that. And so I think we even had one school board member who very specifically at the time said, you know, well, what about when we need police services at school board meetings for, I can't remember the exact words she said, but basically for angry students and parents to protect the school board members. So we utilized her words, and we put her words out there to help gain more momentum around the actual elimination of police. Um, so we put the People's Plan for Police-Free Schools out. And then as soon as we did that, like literally a week to that time that we had put that out, the the Oakland School Police Department had beat up a group of parents who showed up to a school board meeting with instruments, um, you know, arts and crafts, and children singing songs. They beat them up like really really bad, and so we got to see firsthand. People, well, other people got to see firsthand what we have been talking about why police don't need to be in schools, about how rogue they are, about how they're trained to deal with suspects, not students, all of these things. And so we were able to also really take that moment to highlight the fact that, look, we have created a way for you all to eliminate police from schools. Look at the People's Plan, read the People's Plan. We also utilize that time to gain more allies. So we organized more. We started meeting with more people. More people wanted to get involved. They thought that, you know, what they seen was egregious. So people's eyes kind of opened up differently in that moment. In addition to that particular moment, after that happened, what we did was we always had a strategy. We had started to vocalize our strategy. I believe it was 2017 or 20, or maybe the end of 2016. We started to say that we will eliminate police out of schools by 2020, right? So in this time, as we're organizing our allies, working, as Des talked about, like we had to also launch a mini campaign. We had to launch a mini campaign called the Black Sanctuary Campaign, and that campaign focused on really working to organize teachers to not call the police on Black students. And you can take a look, the pledges on our website. You can take a look at that pledge. So we're running these things simultaneously. So we decided to stop and see where we are. And as a strategic move, we went up for a vote. We took Shanti Gonzalez at the time had a budget and finance committee. We always knew that police-free schools was not a budget fight, that it was a moral and political fight. And that is the way that we would win it. We would not win it in a budget argument. And so we brought a proposal to eliminate the police from schools through this budget as a test to see how many of these school board members were really down with us and how many weren't. And we're glad that we actually did that test, because we gained an extra vote. So you need 4 votes to win in Oakland. We had 3 votes vote that night on March, I believe it was March 4th, to eliminate police from schools. So then we took that information back into our base, and we created another analysis, and we figured out, how are we going to shift these other 2 school board members, or these other 2 votes? We need 4, but you know, you always have to have comfort, right? So how are we going to gain 2 more votes to ensure this win? And we started organizing. We did power analysis. We started to look and see, like, we started to dig into people's, you know, lives, like, who are you? Where do you live? Who are your people? What are you passionate about? Where do you work at? Where do your spouse work at? Where do your kids go to school? That kind of thing. Where do you stand on our issue around police-free schools? Or are you all the way on the other side and you want to see police and there's no movement? And how can we take people who are neutral or people who were leaning towards or people that could be flipped and move them over to our side. So we really started to work that strategy. Then, you know, the pandemic hit, things things got kind of like, we all got behind these computers and stuff. But in addition, in that time, we also had launched something right before the pandemic came, and it was called Paint the Town. And we were making police free schools visible by knocking on people's doors, talking to people in the community, putting lawn signs out, posting posters up, talking in the local businesses, hanging posters up. And all the posters were saying police free schools. You can see Imani holding a lawn sign, I believe that is, up on the picture there. So we started to do all of those kind of things to really start to shift the narrative. And in the time of the pandemic, what happened was police brutality against Black people started to become more visible. And so we've seen like the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. We've seen those murders. People are at home on devices, and you're watching this live, and it triggers something in people's psyche. So also that momentum helped us get, you know, like really solidify our allies. We gained new allies from across the country to be able to really push. So when we went, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself with the George Floyd resolution. Before we went to the school board to get the George Floyd resolution, and Des, you can jump in on some of this, we actually organized something called the 10 Days of Action. And we took this 10 Days of Action and we organized our allies. We organized our core allies from coalitions that we are in, the Dignities in Schools California. We organized educators around the Black Sanctuary Pledge. We organized unions and union members who were on our side. We organized clergy, people to come out and speak. We just did a lot of organizing. And of course, we had our base that also had been very loud and continue to be very loud around that.
Yeah. And I'd say even, you know, leading before the 10 days of action, even just thinking about back to that time at the end of 2019, when we released our People's Plan, which was a comprehensive plan to, you know, a step-by-step guide on how OUSD could eliminate school police. We were very known in the community and obviously amongst organizations and, you know, movement people. And we had been saying police free schools, but we weren't really like intentional about everywhere we go, we're going to say police free schools. So at that time is when we realized like there's, you know, we have to go everywhere and say police free schools. We have to paint it everywhere. We've got to make a social media presence. We've got to really visibilize this catchphrase, this issue, and really bring more people, a broader united front to this issue. And then with the 10 days of action, like Jessica said, in March, when we went up for that vote with what ended up being the George Floyd resolution and losing by 1 vote, it's important for us to raise that. Not only was there so many years of organizing behind that, but it also wasn't just a fly-by-night thing or a reaction to the passing of George Floyd. It was something that, or the killing of George Floyd, excuse me. It was something that we had continuously be working on. You know, we've been going to the school board meetings since 2009 almost, or 2010. And so the board knew very well what our issue was, and they knew that we weren't going to let up. And then once they saw us continuously gaining more and more allies with the teachers union, with the teachers group that was brutalized by police that day, and then them being visibilized in that way, that really kind of helped us catapult that issue. But not getting the vote in March kind of had us, you know, pivot and really try to think about, okay, what are ways that we can really escalate this issue? And, you know, like Jessica said, it was really just meeting the momentum of now you have this becoming a hot button issue, and everybody wants to talk about police free schools, and everybody wants to say defund the police. And then now you have various examples, or even more and more examples of brutal killings and police brutality all over. And now people want to do something and they want to feel involved. And so we took advantage of that with the 10 days of action. And so we had a petition that we created that got past 25, I think it's even past like 28,000 signatures at that time. At the same time, we were heavy on our social media presence because we understand the importance of social media, of social activism or organizing, and of building the United Front in that way. And our social media grew by like 15,000 plus followers at the same time. We were constantly putting out calls to action for the community and supporters to do, like calling the school board members, texting them, emailing them. I mean, they were blowing them up. Their phones, mailboxes, everything was full, to the point that they were even emailing us in response, like, we're getting all the calls, and like it was really escalated at that point. But they still were not making the decision. They weren't making a stand, and they weren't being true to what they said that they believed, which is creating a sanctuary for Black, Brown, and all students. So we further escalated. As this picture, you can see, this is me with the megaphone, and me and Jessica went to one of the school board members' house and called her out in front of her entire neighborhood, because she was one of the examples of the people who was a Black woman, a board member, who pretended to be, progressive, but was very, very strict on her stance and her belief in policing and the importance of policing in schools and building relationships and all those things that we know are harmful and traumatizing to students and families. And so those are some of the escalation tactics that really helped us get to this win. And so we did that for 10 days straight. And then that led us up to a vote on June 24th, when the school board actually passed our George Floyd resolution, which again was developed from our people's plan. So again, it was work that we had already done, that they've already seen, but it was really just about meeting the moment and them kind of, realizing that this is the time to make history. It's now or never. And so a little bit about the George Floyd resolution, again, developed from our people's plan that we did in 2019. And, it was a step-by-step guide on how OUSD could effectively eliminate police, why it was important, some data, pieces of a report that we did, I believe in 2016, with very, very strong evidence that, none of us need to be convinced on why they needed to eliminate police from schools, obviously, but the resolution was aimed to eliminate the department and its sworn officers, and it would direct the superintendent to reallocate funds previously used for those officers towards student supports, such as school-based social workers, psychologists, restorative and transformative justice practitioners, and other mental and behavioral health professionals, to meet the needs of students. And that the George Floyd resolution also directed the superintendent to launch, by July 2020, the inclusive, community-driven process. And this was one of the most important tenets, I believe, of the resolution, was making sure that they understood and positioned the community, which are parents, students, teachers, ally organizations, Black organizing projects, all of us, in a community-driven process that will be in front of and leading this work, with real teeth in the work, a real seat at the table, real decision-making power, those things. And that was really important. And with this resolution, one of the key things that we felt really was a good takeaway was really the relationship that we built with our legal allies that helped us develop this resolution, that helped us really put teeth in this resolution, so it wasn't just an empty piece of paper and an empty promise. And then also, probably the most important thing was the organizing that we did to organize school board members. So like Jessica said, I mean, we had very hard conversations at times with some school board members who said some things that, offended us and offended some of our members who were there, and kind of really vocalized some of the implicit bias and anti-Black racism that was really deeply rooted in their ideology, that they always argued wasn't there. But in having those conversations and confronting them with why you are not agreeing to take a stance on this issue, that was identified. And so some of those things, like organizing the school board members, having those conversations, calling them out on their bias, and then pushing them to make the right decision, was really key in getting this resolution passed.
The other thing that I would just add to this, really important to highlight just in terms of our organizing work, is that resolution, like the things that are written in that resolution, came from our organizing work. It came from us holding listening sessions in the community and really listening to people about what alternatives that they wanted to see. The other thing that I would say is also really important about the George Floyd resolution is that when it came time to make the decision to push for the win, it was our base that pushed. It was our actual membership that said, now is the time for us to go for the full elimination. And so it's really important to develop your base of people and have people who are most impacted by the issue there. Oftentimes they can see things that maybe you won't, right? They have a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise around these types of fights and these issues, and are able to really bring the heat and the momentum and the strategy and the outreach that it's going to take. We couldn't have won these resolutions if it wasn't for us actually taking the time to develop the base to be able to actually push for these things and strategize in how we would get these things. So I just want to emphasize that that's very important.
Yeah, definitely. And just even thinking about from my experience, I wasn't staff at that point. I was a member. I've been a member for years. And like I said earlier in the introduction, I was impacted by school push out myself. And so even me being able to speak to some of these things, like the policy says that they do this, but I know they really did this to me and so and so and so forth. And so that's definitely like crucial. But that brings us to the phase 5, which is transformation, which is where we're kind of like at the leg of now. And this really, so we had to hit the ground running post vote. So literally the night of our vote being passed, we also found out about some other things that kind of impacted our strategy and what we saw for the implementation, which was our school board also deciding to eliminate their SSOs. And this was something that we weren't planning to attack immediately. And we had, a plan and a vision for how we're going to attack the SSO issue in regards to implementation, but that was something that was like, we have to deal with immediately because they also decided to just go ahead and eliminate that night. And another issue was, like we said, fighting for co-convenership and decision-making power. So not just getting this resolution passed, but us and other community stakeholders are going to be at this table, equal with you guys at this table, and have real decision-making power, not just influence on the decisions that you guys think should be made. And then another thing that was, a school board trick, as school boards always have a bag full of tricks, was a tight timeline to create the alternative safety plan to really ensure that police were actually out by the end of 2020. And so basically they told us that now that this vote is passed, you have, I think maybe if we started in July, we had about a few months to really come up with a real alternative safety plan on who would be called instead of police for what. And that is something that is not easy to do in that time. That entailed us meeting like multiple times a week, weekly with the district, getting inside the district, which is something as a community organization is not something that we do or necessarily want to do. We want to be on the community side with the people, but we had to get a little bit into the district to make sure that some of the district's bottom lines were identified. And at the same time, we had to establish BOP's bottom lines, like what's our ultimate vision for police-free schools, and what are we not going to compromise on. And so we came up with 5 bottom lines. The first was the clear protocol limiting Oakland Police Department when schools call them, because we know that there is going to be some few instances where Oakland Police Department will have to be called for whatever reason. So we're going to make sure that all the policies go around that they do not call them for mainly the reasons that they're being called. But in the instances that they do have to be called, there's clear protocol limiting that. Second outcome was designing police-free responses to those top 5 calls for service. So throughout the data of years that we've done, we realized, some of the main calls, if Oakland had maybe 2,666, I believe it was, calls to police service in one school year, less than 10% of that was for real safety issues that validated a call to the police. So you had these top 5 calls to service, which is, stand by and preserve the peace, which is breaking up school fights, which is, escorting students to the office, those kind of instances. We're going to design police-free responses because police do not need to be called for service for that. The third outcome was redesigning the job description for the SSOs and other important staff roles related to what we call the culture and climate issue. And again, the SSO issue, the school security officer, was one thing that was kind of slipped in there at the last minute by the district. So that was something that's our bottom line with that. The fourth, which was very important, which is reinvest and reparations. So making sure that the district procures the resources needed to implement the second and third steps, and not use budget as an excuse any longer as to why they can't successfully implement police-free schools. And then lastly, create a blueprint for transform school culture and climate that can be translated throughout the nation to create this reality of police-free schools and ultimately police-free communities. And I'm gonna pass it back over to Jessica.
Thank you. Des, can you go back one slide really quick? I just want to answer. I want to clarify a few things that I've seen coming through, rolling through the chat. And I know we'll have time for Q&A, but a few things that I just want to flag. And so when we are talking about SSOs, we're talking about school site officers. Those are unarmed security officers who at the time sat under the police department. And so that's who we're referencing. Unarmed, they're not police, they're unarmed security officers. And then there was also a question just around clear protocol limiting OPD when schools call them. So moving into this phase of transformation, we I guess you can go to the next slide. I'm going to answer that question about the protocol. We really knew that in order for us in this tight timeline that in this tight timeline that we had, in order for us to actually produce what the George Floyd resolution had called for, which was a safety plan, which we knew that it was going to take 2 to 3 years to really develop a community-driven process that included a broad range of voices, of the people who are most impacted, of the people who are closest to the school sites that are going to have to implement this, that it was going to take time in order to do that. So we settled to do something that we are calling a reasonable compliance plan. In reasonable compliance plan, basically we looked at what is it that OUSD needs to have done in order to make sure that we have the police completely out. Also, there were a few things that we had to address. When we looked at the calls for service, the top 3 calls for service that were really high were for things like 5150 mental health calls. We knew that there was a problem with that, and that many children did not need 5150s, and that police should not be dealing with mental health issues when it comes to students. So we addressed that in the reasonable compliance plan. We also looked at all the policies throughout OUSD where police were embedded, and we removed all of those. And so when we're talking about clear protocols, that's a bottom line that's full. But in this reasonable compliance plan, the first phase we did was make sure that we actually extracted them from all of the policies, the classroom guides that teachers have to use, the things that administrators have to use, and that tells them what steps to do. We made sure that police were removed from all of those things. And then we developed internally like a clear protocol, like here are a list of things that you do not call police services for, but you call to get support from a support department that we helped to create, which is called the Culture and Climate Department. And so those are kind of I seen that question around protocols, and there is still work that we have to do around this idea of clear protocols. We still have work to do in terms of OPD and making sure that that they are not just walking up on campuses doing what they feel like they want to do. So there is still that leg of work that we're looking at right now that we still have to do. So inside of this reasonable compliance phase, like Des was saying, we had this really tight timeline. In fact, it was 4 weeks is what we had. We spent the beginning of the process developing something very different. We took lessons learned from other things that we've seen. So again, we've seen the district pass policies, and we know if you don't pay attention, then they're not really implemented. We also seen the district make commitments to community and say, okay, we're going to work with you and we're going to do this, but community didn't have a real stake in it, and they didn't have any real power. So when we walked in the door, our first discussions were really around, we don't want to be community stakeholders in this process. We want to be co-conveners. We utilize that as a strategy, knowing that we want to have this all-inclusive community-driven process, and we want wherever the decisions are going to be made for there to be shared community power. And so we went in and we fought for the co-convenership, and we won that co-convenership. The other thing that we did is we continued to push, because when they put us our backs against the wall almost with this 4-week tight plan, we didn't get to have the robust community driven process and all the voices um that we wanted to really be able to craft the alternatives and all of that around the table. So what we did was we said, look, anything that we created in this reasonable compliance plan is subject to change in what we're calling phase two. Phase two is when we're titling it launching the people's plan in action. But again, that's where we'll have the larger community driven process where people will be able to say what they want to see in schools, what they think alternatives should be, all of those things, right? And so we also made sure that inside of this reasonable compliance plan that we had the district write a commitment to the money that used to be used for the police department would be invested in this implementation process. So that is a part of that process too. And so this was a very interesting process because we have like a lot of lessons learned while we were inside of the district and we were fighting for this idea around co-convenership, making sure we have shared decision making power, making sure that we put together a plan that puts something in place, even though it's temporary, but put something in place until we can have the larger community driven process. Meanwhile, inside of the George Floyd resolution, it called for the removal of police at the end of December. I think it's like December 30th or December 31st. And what happened was somebody forgot to give pink slips out. So the actual officers ended up staying on payroll until January 11th. And that is something that we had to deal with, and we had to push back on and we had to fight against, along with the chief of police staying. They wanted him to stay until March, and we said, no, absolutely not. We pushed back on that till February. And he did leave in February. So there's no police at OUSD currently. But I say that to say that when we start talking about this idea of school culture and climate and transformation, there is also a way that we can be blindsided in these processes of like hurry up and wait and hurry up and get this thing out. So meanwhile, we're working on this whole full out comprehensive plan, pouring tons of resources in it, gathering our allies to support us in doing that, and the police still weren't out in time. Some other things just to highlight that we were able to accomplish during this reasonable compliance plan phase is that we were very clear there was a lot of equipment, there were cars, there were lots of guns and all that kind of stuff. We did not want them to take the guns and ammunition and all that stuff and give it to OPD because we know what would happen. They would use them to kill our people or they would end up in our communities. So what we did was we fought with OUSD to have them to melt the guns and the weapons away. And so we won that. They melted them away in a foundry. And so I think those are some important things to highlight. The other thing is that currently we are in this phase two where we're designing out this community driven process, and that will be up and running by April. So that will be great because it's going to be important for us to have our allies around the table with us, to have allies who represent bases, that have people who are most impacted by these things to be able to develop and craft the solutions is also going to be important. I've seen some things in the comment for us too. As you know, we launched the mini campaign, the Black Sanctuary campaign, in that we were able to gain the support of the teachers union. We also are going to have to organize within the teachers union because what we're asking for is like, this is the mindset shift, right? We need people to change the way that they think about Black students, period. And also principals. And so we've done some organizing during the time leading up to the win. That organizing now has to continue. And so I do want to highlight those things as those things are still happening.
Yeah, I know we
speak on
had,
phase three. Oh, I'm sorry. I
sorry.
didn't speak on the that's okay. I didn't speak on the third phase, but the third phase is really just about, after we get these alternatives and things developed, there's a period where we're going to have to assess and evaluate all of this. Some of that assessment and evaluation is happening as a through line, but more intentional, making sure again that community has power within the school district around the things that the community puts in place.
Yeah, I was just going to say we had 2 other slides that really just encompass what Jessica already went over, which is takeaways. And I know for time's sake, we want to do breakout. So that's the end of our presentation.
Woohoo! That was great. That is so much information, such valuable tactics. I think when, all of us have so many questions, and I'm sure you saw all the questions in the chat, of what, what should we be doing next, right? And I think kind of like, as you were saying, it really depends on what the community wants, like who is going to really be behind us in this process. And we at San Jose Unified School District has been the teachers have been working a little bit, the teachers union working a little bit with San Jose Unified Equity Coalition. So that's a partnership that we are currently nurturing right now. And so, yeah, we're going to transition to breakout rooms. If anyone who would like to be with the Spanish interpreter, please put in the chat so that way I can put you in with Yaneli. And then, yes, we're gonna do Q&A, but I just wanna know that way I can make that happen. So, and we've got a bunch of questions here. Specifically, I think one that is all on our minds. How did you get around the budget issues, and were there any issues with teacher union rules about new hires? And I heard you say about how you were trying to make sure that the money that was supposed to go towards these new, programs to support students, and specifically Black students, wasn't, going to the officers anymore, and trying to make sure that it was going to put back to these programs. So were there any other areas that you had to work on the specificity of where money was going, where it was coming from, and how it was going to be spent?
Yeah, early on in our campaign, when we were in our research phase, we actually we followed the dollars. We looked at what is the investment that is going into police services. So we knew how much money, we had been following that throughout the campaign. So we knew how much money was supposed to be there for the police services. We have been very consistent in our strategy and in our narrative that we wanted the money to be reinvested in things like school counselors. We talked about restorative justice, all of those positive, non-punitive things. And so this implementation process is where it's being invested in currently in order to make the things that the community is going to come out with happen. Just in terms of like the budget, like we were just clear, like we know that that's how people get set up. You say you're going to create something new, and then the next thing you say is you don't have enough money to do it. So we fought for police-free schools and the money.
Yeah, it's very important to have that distinction and everything laid out on the table. So there's another question here with like just a direct follow-up. Do you know what the Oakland Police Department budget was? Or sorry, Oakland School District budget was?
$2.3 million. The last we looked, it was $2.3 million. Those budgets, so there's the $2.3 million, but then there's also like these positions that weren't funded. And so when you look at like actual spending, it might have looked like 1.5, I think, at one point and 1.8 at another, because they weren't filling those positions. So the whole time that we were fighting this fight, anytime there was a budget kind of thing. And we know OUSD, if anybody follows it, like they're bad with money and the budget is just horrible. And so we always would raise the issue of how much they're spending on police and how they don't need to be investing that money in police. So through the budget fights, we would have incremental wins where we would chip away at the number of police officers slowly down to, I think that when we actually pushed for the George Floyd resolution, Des, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we only had 7 police officers at that time because we had chipped it away throughout those years.
Wow, yeah, that's a good plan, and making sure that we know exactly what the money is, how much money is in that budget and where it's going to, is definitely something we're trying as well to make sure we understand for San Jose Unified. So there was another
Say really quick that
yes.
we're still tracking it because there's always tricks. So even in this process, we're still having to track the dollar. So we're having to understand, like when they got rid of all those police officers, like they had to pay people vacation payout and all that kind of stuff. So we're still contending with those numbers.
Yeah, I think that's kind of goes to this next question, because you mentioned earlier, you were like saying, where is this money that was supposed to be spent on these officers? Where is it now? Right. And, for us, that's what we're being told. And so, like, if money has been spent already, like, what was that? I heard you say earlier that there was that battle of like trying to make sure that the money that was supposed to go towards students wasn't spent on officers, right? That you said the pink slips weren't given out when they should have been. So we're being told in San Jose Unified that school resource officers aren't on campus, but where's the money going is what we're wondering. And so how was your conversation? How did that happen? How did you say, well, actually that money needs to go back into this program?
I know you'll probably jump in, Jessica, but I'm thinking just back even to when we first started really going heavy on the campaign, and OUSD was championing themselves as a sanctuary district and bringing up restorative justice and all these things as an example, but it wasn't being implemented and it wasn't being funded, and it was heavily being cut. And so that was another kind of way I think that we leveraged, like, you say that you're going to do this and you have restorative justice that you walk around and proclaim, but it's only in like 5 of your 30 schools or something like that, and those practitioners are being used for something else. And so in us saying that some of those funds should be going towards some of these student support services, including restorative justice, I think that that was also a way of calling them on their BS, for lack of better words, of like, there's also another channel here of something that is a student support service that needs the funding that's not being funded as well. And just kind of encompassing that whole, entire school culture and climate umbrella, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, and I would just add, just in terms of your specific question, like during COVID, where are the police and how are they getting paid? So for OUSD, I don't know what this looks like for other districts, but for OUSD, the actual sergeants and the actual police officers, they were unionized. So they were a part of a union. And so the district had to negotiate out of their union contracts. And so they had to pay out like the vacation time that people had accrued. They, had to negotiate and pay them to a certain point. And that includes like even with the chief of police. So some of that money that we're like, hey, you need to put it in this process, they battled it out in these union and contract arguments. So all of it did not, like for this first year, all of it did not go over to where the money is sitting currently, is in the culture and climate department for implementation. All of it did not go over to implementation. We fought to get as much of it as we could outside of, the union contracts and all that kind of stuff invested in that process. And we also fought to get a commitment. And like I said before, we're still contending with what those numbers look like, because right now we're being told like 1.8 million, will be reinvested in this process in 2 years. And we're contending with that because okay, if it's 1.8 million for now, then where's the rest of the money? Because you don't have to pay those people out every year for the following years. So it's still a struggle. It's still a battle trying to navigate between OUSD's budget.
So be vigilant and stay on top of them is what I'm learning. And then just a very quick final question before we get into breakout rooms. So what are the alternatives that you all were proposing when it comes to not having officers for after school activities, like at sporting events and dances? Like what was that conversation like, and what did you come up with?
So this is really interesting because we're actually working with this district in a very different way, right? So we are pushing the district to value community and to value a community-driven process. We put in this reasonable compliance phase, we put things in place because we have to mitigate further harm from police, from any policing entity on students. So like I was saying, we did the things around like making sure that if a child is encountering something mental health related at a school site, that the person that responds is like a school psychologist or a behavioral health assistant, or they have a partnership with Alameda County, but it's mental health people and not police. That was necessary for us to actually put in place because that is something that was actively happening. And now schools are talking about opening back up. Or even us developing a culture and climate department to make sure that the school sites themselves, because what we learned early on in our research is that a lot of times people were just calling the police because they didn't have enough support on their campus to support students. So making sure that people had a place to call for support that is not related to policing, that's related more about like relationship centered building, non-punitive, more rooted in de-escalation and transformative justice practices. We had to put that in place because a high number of calls were for school fights. Now, all of the broader kind of alternatives, what are we going to do at a school game, that kind of thing, we think that the community should be the people who create and craft those alternatives. We don't want it to just be us at BOP, but we want to bring our allies in. We want to bring people, more people who are most impacted, more people who are closest to the school sites who are going to have to implement this in order to do that. And that is one of the things that we had to, somebody asked the question, like, what was a lot of the pushback? A lot of the pushback that we got is what's the plan? What's the plan? What's the plan? Even though we put together the people's plan, people wanted these nitty gritty details. And we pushed this district to that, no, you're going to have to rely on community. You're going to have to trust community. You're going to have to work with community, which is something very different. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, definitely. And I saw that, Desiree, you put community liaisons. I think it's so important to put control and autonomy into the community, and making sure that, you know, that trust is there, that back and forth trust. Okay, so we're going to get into the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, people. Welcome back. I know conversations were probably cut off mid-word, mid-sentence, but that is okay. So thank you so much, Desiree and Jessica, for all of your knowledge and insight. And, you know, I think we all are so appreciative to learn from all the work that you've done, the exhausting work that you've done over the last 10 years and that you're continuing to do. And I hope everyone was able to connect with other people, and we can continue to build solidarity throughout the Bay Area and throughout California. There was another member, Mohammed, he's still on the call. He said he's from New Jersey. So joining the call, trying to, you know, make sure we have efforts. Thank you, Mohammed. You know, solidified efforts in getting police off of campuses. So I appreciate everyone for all your efforts and for being here. And, you know, if we can continue to learn from each other, we can continue to grow and see the community and the future we want for our kids.
Police-free schools and communities to the Bay Area and the broader world.
Police-free schools and communities.